Hello there, I am Oliver Hammis, and this is my 9th grade U.S. History's virtual museum. So first off, this is what my museum looks from the outside, and we're going to get started. So walking up to my building, you of course see the sign at the front, but also when you walk in, you notice how all four of these lights actually turn on at the same time. This is done through my level blueprint, in which each of the point lights themselves have their own reference, and then the reference is linked up to a component, and the components are linked up to a toggle visibility that when you enter the trigger box, which is in this room, that then activates the toggle visibility, and then when you leave, there's a slight delay, and then it turns off. So first off, we're going to go to my Women's History exhibit, which has 4 artifacts. So first up, we have the Rosie the Riveter posters, the right being way more well known, but both represented how women worked in World War II. Then we have the Sojourner Truth Ain't I a Woman speech, which is her talking about how essentially it was seen that women were supposed to be treated better, at her as an African American woman, she was not treated better. We have an ad for grape nuts, which was pandering towards women who society was making them think that they needed to be thinner, so grape nuts is trying to play into that, making them think that if you ate grape nuts, then you would be thinner. Finally, we have my essay. This essay is about what has changed, what has stayed the same, and what needs to change about how women are treated. So, if you want to pause and read this, I apologize. If you want to pause and read this, then you can. Moving on next to my industrialization exhibit, we have 3 more artifacts. First up, we have this model of how a monopoly works. And you can pause and read it right here. Next up, we have these posters of child labor. The left being one of boys who were working in a coal mine, the right being one of boys who were working at a bowling alley. Children. And currently my Unreal is glitching, so it's not showing it correctly. And then next we have this timeline of the Homestead strikes. You can pause and read it. Next we have my Progressive Era exhibit. This here is a reading of The Jungle, which was a book that highlighted how the meat industry did its production, and it was incredibly infamous at the time for just going into not horrifying, but very extensive detail on what happened. And as you can see a little explanation of this. And then of course we have the reading on the wall. Next up we have these Theodore Roosevelt propaganda posters. And then I have an explanation popping up here of what happened. Not what happened, but these posters themselves. And if you were struggling reading that because of how it's glitching, the left is showing Theodore Roosevelt playing the Star Spangled Banner on a quote unquote piano, which is actually just different aspects of how he was busting monopolies or just busting big trust funds. So each of these little sticks are the quote unquote keys, and they're each methods that he busted them up. And then each of these pigs here are squealing to make the sounds, and each of them are different trusts. And then here, it is Santa who is going to give the nomination for the 1904 election, the Republican nomination, to either Roosevelt or Hanna, who were the prime nominees. Next, and finally, for the Progressive Era exhibit, we have this picture of places that were called tenements. Now, basically, tenements were, of course, I have an explanation if you all would like to read them. And that's not doing it right. What? Alright. It's glitching again. It's showing the explanation for the next room, but tenements were essentially houses that were incredibly small and cramped and were meant to be able to, quote-unquote, shove as many families as possible into the one house, so then the people who own the house can make enough money. And for many families, that was their only option, because it was the cheapest option, it's the only one they could afford. And finally, we have my African American history exhibit. So on the left, we have two posters for a group that were called the Black Panthers. And we have the explanation here on the screen. Essentially, what that says is they were very much known for being violent, and it's represented in this poster. For example, on the right, it says move on over or we'll move you over, thus implying that they will be violent if you don't agree with them. Next, here we have these readings on Jim Crow, and I have the explanation isn't showing, haha. Jim Crow laws were essentially, they were named after a character that a man performed when he was doing blackface a lot, and they were essentially discrimination laws that, some of the examples of discrimination were, for education, separating kids into black and white schools, and the white schools would usually have better equipment. Voting rights, which were states could, basically make rules for voting that were specifically made to make it harder for a black American to be able to vote. For example, making a literacy test to be able to vote, which many African Americans were not educated at the time, so it would be way harder for them to pass that test. And finally, we have the Double V survey poster. We have the explanation on the screen, if you'd like to pause and read that. And essentially, the Double V campaign was a victory on both sides. Abroad being during World War II to have a victory in the war, but then back at home having a victory to give rights to African Americans. And this survey here just shows the result of soldiers at war and what they would like to prioritize. The options were no answer, undecided, or try and do the both. Try and win the war before getting better rights for African Americans, or just trying to get better rights for African Americans first, or do both. So that is my 9th grade U.S. History Museum. I hope you enjoyed.